All right, here we go. This is going to be my review of last night's feature presentation, Back to the Future Part 3, 1990. This one stars Michael J. Fox again. Now, in Part 2, he played four characters, really. He played the 17-year-old Marty McFly. He played the 47-year-old Marty McFly in 2015, and then he played his own son in 2015. He played his own daughter in 2015. For those of you who don't know who that was him in drag. And he's back in this one playing himself. Playing Marty again. And he's now 28 years old in real life, playing a 17-year-old. It's not really fair. He's more like probably 26 or 7 whenever this was filmed at the same time as Back to the Future Part 2. Back in, I think, early 1989. I think Part 2 came out in November of 1989, and then Part 3 came out in like May of 1990. So it was really close together, and they were filmed like at the same time. Christopher Lloyd is back in this as Doc Brown. And then we have Mary Steenburgen, who plays Clara Clayton, the school teacher in 1885. Thomas F. Wilson again. This time he is Buford Mad Dog Tannen, a relative of Biff way back in the West. And we also get a little bit of 1985 Biff as well. What some people call the gay Biff, because the way he acts in it. But you see him at the end, like putting the wax on Marty's car, so you get a little bit of him. But it's mostly Mad Dog. And then Leah Thompson in this. Leah Thompson does a really good job in this particular film, I think, as Maggie McFly, primarily the great grandmother of Marty, and then we get a little bit of her at the end, playing Lorraine. Okay, so Leah Thompson, I think she's really good in this. Elizabeth Shue returns as Jennifer, the girlfriend. She's not in this very much. Just at the very end, he gets her off sleeping on the porch, and then takes her to the train track. She's not in this very much. Elizabeth Shue. We have Matt Clark in this as the bartender in the Old West. It's good to see Matt Clark, and it's a great long-time character actor. He's been in a lot of movies. My favorite one that he's in is when he plays Charlie Sheen's father in a movie that I love, Five Aces, 1999. Matt Clark still with us. He's about 88 years old now. But an actor who's not with us, who was in Back to the Future Part 3, is Harry Carey Jr., another guy who was in a ton of films. This was one of his last films. It was great that they were able to get him into this, since it was a Western, and he was in a lot of Westerns. He was one of the saloon guys, old guys hanging out in the saloon. And you look at his career, he goes back to 1921. He was in a movie called Desperate. His first film was called Desperate Trails. He was a young baby in that, uncredited. But his first film after that was 1946's Rolling Home, a Western, of course. He was in tons of Westerns, including 1948's Red River, John Wayne film. He's in a lot of films with John Wayne. James Tolkien returns, not a very big role for him this time, as Marshall Strickland, who is a relative of, the Principal Strickland. And he looks different. He's got, a big mustache. He's got hair and a hat. And he does a really good job in this, in his limited role. Okay, so James Tolkien, good to have him back one more time. Returning to this film, both of these were not in Part 2, but they were in Part 1. Mark McClure of The Phone Call 1977 is back as Dave McFly, and then Wendy Jo Sperger. I don't think I mentioned her in the first one. It's kind of forgettable. She's not very good. But Linda McFly, the sister. You see them at the very end. They're, I think Dave McFly says, "We're late for brunch." You see him in 1985. They're getting ready to leave, and so this really short scene with them. The scene also includes Jeffrey Wiseman, who reprises his role as George McFly, no Crispin Glover. Again, and Jeffrey Wiseman is conveniently hidden in that scene, kind of standing at the door, so that the viewer can't really tell that it's not Crispin Glover. There were some lawsuits over that, using his likeness, and it'll never end. And then a couple of guys that are gone from this, that were in 1 and 2 that are not here, is Billy Zane and Casey Siemaszko, who were like a couple of the hangers-on of Biff in Part 1, 1955, and then in Part 2, alternate 85 and 1955. So those guys are back. I mean, those guys do not return in this one, and that's a good thing, because it wouldn't make any sense to have like them having long-distance relatives having the same leeches back in 1885. So that was a pretty good decision not to bring them back. You have Christopher Wynn is an actor here who is a part of like Buford Tannen's gang, and he's also in Needles' gang. So it's kind of weird. He's playing two different characters, like the two different gangs 100 years apart. An actor is not in much else, but the other one that was in Biff's gang is named J.J. Cohen, but he does return in this, and he's in Needles' gang at the end. Needles is played, of course, by Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and this time you get to see him in Part 2. You saw him in 2015, and in this one you get to see him in 1985. He's really over the top. He's the one who challenges Marty to a drag race. Billy McKinney is really good as the engineer of the train in 1885. He was, I think, best known for his role in the movie Deliverance, 1971 or 2. And then you have the members of ZZ Top are in this movie. The trio of Frank Beard, Billy Gibbons, Rusty Hill. They're all in this at the party, playing some music. And they also contribute an original song to the film's soundtrack called Double Back. A pretty decent song. It plays at the ending credits of the film. Ronald Reagan was offered they cracked on him in the first one and made reference to him on the movie House in 1955. Reagan and Stanwyck, I forget the name of the film. But he was offered a cameo role as the mayor in this, and he turned it down. This was right after he was out of office, and his mind was probably still, was probably good enough to do it, but he turned it down. I think it would have been good to have him in this, but instead they had someone else. I don't know his name. Einstein, the dog, is never credited, I noticed, in any of these movies. He's not even listed on IMDb is uncredited, so it's kind of a shame. But Einstein the dog should have had a credit in this. So this is the first time I saw this film. I liked it, but I was turned off a little bit. Maybe it's because I was a kid and I didn't like the romantic angle in this. But then over the years, I've come to place this one above Part 2. And after watching it, Part 2 2 nights ago and then Part 3 last night, I still hold this one as my second favorite in here. So the negatives of the film, most of that party scene, the little town party thing that they do, it's some of that I didn't care for a whole lot, except for like the Marshall scene was really good with Marshall Strickland. James Tolkien, he does a really good job. He just makes the most of that limited role. Then there's also a deleted scene where Buford Tannen shoots him in the back, and he's dying, and his dying words are to the son, remember the word, discipline. Don't forget that, son. I think it's good that they didn't do that part. They didn't have him shot, but he did get that good line. It was really, really good. Never give him an inch, son. So I think that was a smart decision to cut that part out. So that part I don't really care for that much, and I do like the shoot when Marty does the shooting thing, the little shooting game, and it's kind of a redemption from part 2, where he's kind of embarrassed in the 80s cafe. But it also sets up a good line where the guy who's manning the station says, "Where did you learn how to shoot like that?" It says 7-Eleven. This is pretty good. Another negative is that they're stuck in one time period, and there's really nothing else you can do. Everything was kind of tied up. They fixed everything in 2015. They fixed everything in 1955. So there's really not much else they could do. Create all these different paradoxes. This is how it was. So, but that is kind of a strike against it. They're kind of stuck, and it just becomes a Western with some conflicts. So it's kind of a straight up Western kind of comedy thing. Now the good. How do you wrap up a trilogy where the first 2 films were excellent? And a lot of people might fail at this, but I think they did a masterful job with wrapping up the trilogy. And then if this was made today, it would be like 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, and they would put way too much into it. They did an excellent job with editing. This thing is only like 1 hour and 50 minutes. I always thought maybe it was longer than that, but what they fit into that 110 minutes, it's very impressive. They did an excellent job of editing things in this. The scene with the that I would also, just to nitpick, the taxi driver thing where he's in front of the mirror. Marty's going, "You talking to me?" I think that could have been cut out. I didn't think that was very funny. Nitpicking, but a scene they didn't really need in there. Part 1 had a satisfying ending. Part 2 has the cliffhanger, things untied, and then Part 3 has an incredibly satisfying ending. And that's the nature of most trilogies, how they work. But it doesn't mean that Part 2s aren't great. Empire Strikes Back, I think, is my favorite of the 3. Okay, in the Omen trilogy, Part 2 is my favorite. Okay, but this one is not. The case is not the same for this. I would say Part 1's the best. 3 is second. 2 is my least favorite, even though I still really like it. But that's it. That's just kind of how it works out. But they managed to outdo, in Part 3, the Part 1 ending sequence. As great as that was, with the lightning bolt and trying to get to the thing on time and fixing it at the clock and all that, the storm, and an incredible finish to where you're not sure if he's going to make everything work out to get it to 88 and to get the thing into the flux capacitor. So that's an incredible sequence, but they outdo it, in my opinion, in Part 3 with the whole train thing. It's harder to do it. I think it's a more difficult plan, and I love the plan. I love having the train. I love hijacking the plane. Is this a stick up? No, it's a science experiment. It's a great line. Some of it's over the top in that scene. With Clara, how she gets back on the train, she chases Doc, and she's trying to get to the DeLorean 2 from the train. She's falling. The way she's falling, it's a little over the top, but it's still, it's good. They're pulling out all the stops in this, with things exploding, with throwing the hoverboard out. I think it's really cool the way they end it in this, and the way Doc explains it when he does the model, kind of gives you an image of how it would work out if it works out, and the way they do the shot of the train falling off and exploding, and then shows 1985 and it goes down the track that's there at that point, is awesome, I think. And then having the whole ordeal of how, make sure you destroy the time machine, how that all just works out with a train destroying it, is awesome. I think that helps cut the time down, and it's realistic too. Part 3 brings back, this is probably the biggest thing, but biggest check in its favor. It brings back the heart of part one. So part one's had a lot of heart to it. The whole thing with the parents, seeing his parents and then trying to get him back together, undeniable, and then talking to him at the end before he leaves. I have a feeling about you too. It has a lot of heart to it. Part two did not. It did not have it. That part was removed. It becomes a comedy, almost like a dark comedy in a way. Some of the stuff bordered on crude. It left kind of a bad feel. That there was a bad tone to that movie. It's still really good, but there's something about the tone of it that kind of like pulls people in the wrong, leaves people with kind of a bad taste in their mouth. But Biff being someone who murdered George McFly, it doesn't seem very real. It doesn't come off quite realistic to me. He was just a bully. It's hard to believe he would become that corrupt, but another kind of just thing that didn't sit well with me, him being a murderer and then trying to kill Marty too. I don't know. Part three, you have the heart returns because he meets his great-great-grandparents, and you have Seamus McFly. I think it's a really good character in this. And so is Maggie. Yeah, Maggie McFly. But the whole thing, like meeting them, and Seamus has this feeling about being connected to him, even though he doesn't know who he is. And the Marty meeting his great grandfather, the little baby, and it's kind of a touching moment. And then at the party, and this continues a little bit further, but Seamus and Maggie kind of they feel connected to him, and then they're criticizing him, and he's giving him advice over his hot-headedness of always bending to when someone calls him a coward or yellow or chicken, and tells him think about the future. And someone in the family, his brother, did the same thing and died because of it. So there's a lot of good heart in that. There's a great family bond with the past, which is really cool, and then looking forward to the future. How it helps him for the future. So that's really looking forward to what would happen with the drag race, and he would have hit the Mercedes. So he makes that decision on his own, which is really good. It's more realistic and feels better at the end. So and then of course the Doc and Clara thing I came around on. It feels very natural. They have an excellent chemistry. That was Christopher Lloyd's first kiss, by the way, on film in his film career, when he kisses Clara, and it feels really natural, and they feels like they really are. It's love at first sight, and that's a really cool thing because part one focused on the parents, George and Lorraine. Part two focused on Marty. This one focuses more on the Doc, and I think that's really cool that you have him as kind of the main focus on this. It's cool how you have kind of the role reversal of Doc and Marty, how you have when Clara comes to see him, and there's this attraction. You can tell she really likes him, and he's looking, he's kind of the way that Marty reacts to it is similar to the way that Doc reacts to Marty's mother coming on to him in part one, like, oh, this is going to mess things up, So you see some little examples of that kind of role reversal, like Doc saying, this is heavy, or Marty says, great Scott, which is normally Doc's line, and then Doc says, yeah, this is heavy, which is normally Marty's line. So that's kind of a funny thing. Good comedy element. And the Doc's look, so in part 1 and 2, he's just kind of an old geeky scientist, which is fine. But in this one, he's still kind of the old geeky scientist, and I love his machinery in his place, like the iced tea. He makes the iced tea, and the breakfast thing. the breakfast machine that makes the eggs, like has the timer and the coffee, and that cuts the bacon onto the little frying pan in the morning. It's a callback to part one with the dog food and everything, in his place. And there's a lot of callbacks in this film, and it's not just for the sake of doing a callback. They're all kind of fit together, which I really like. But Doc Brown's look in this is awesome. I think he looks really cool in this with his height. He's tall. He looks good with the hat. He looks more tan. He's got the Western clothes. He looks really good in that. He looks. She calls him. Clara calls him, I think, dashing maybe, and he is. He's like really like handsome in this. So I think his look is awesome in this film, and the way he shoots the rope that Marty's hanging from is awesome. He got that gun that he has is really cool with the long scope. So Doc is just really shines in this film. I love the train thing when they're setting it up. They have a heart-to-heart talk about I got to make a decision. You have to make a decision to what you're going to do. I have to make a decision with, going with you or Clara. And I think that's, it's amazing how that he has that conflict of like, he's been a scientist his whole life, but then for the first time, he's like being led with his heart. And that's like, I think it's just really awesome. But, some questions like, why not dig up the time machine? Why didn't they just dig up the time machine that Doc buried when he got there? Like, that's been kind of a subject of debate. I don't really know. There's a lot of theories as to why that wouldn't work. Paradoxes. I mean, certainly it would be there, right? Something I got to look into and research again. So that's a big question. But a couple of other things that I noticed was the thing about the debt. Okay, so like the debt of $80 was why he was killed by Buford Tannen. And so now that Marty comes back and explains to him, he's gonna shoot you, and then he sees shows him the newspaper or whatever why he was shot, and then Doc says, "Oh, it makes me wish I'd paid him off." Then why not just pay him off? If he knows there's a debt and he's gonna kill him in a few days, why not just pay him the $80 and at least get that part solved? Is it pride? I don't know. And the other thing that's a cool little nugget in this movie is when they're at the drive-in, when they go to the drive-in in 1955 to send Marty back to 1885 to save Doc. He gets dressed into his Western gear and says, "I feel like Clint Eastwood," or something like that. And Doc's like, "Who?" And then he says, "Oh, I guess you haven't heard of him yet." And then if you look at the signs on the drive-in of the movies playing, one is Tarantula, which I saw for the first time this year, by the way, a 1955 sci-fi film. And the other is another 1955 sci-fi film, Revenge of the Creature, which is done by MST3K, and I've seen many times. Okay, Revenge of the Creature was the first film that had Clint Eastwood. He played like a little lab technician. There's a tiny scene with him in it, and and they joke about this on MST3K. That guy's not gonna mount anything or something. But it's just that I think that's clearly done on purpose by the director and the producer to fit that little nugget in there. I guess you haven't heard of him yet. Well, that would have been the year that movie had come out, yet they still wouldn't know, the name Clint Eastwood. So that was kind of cool to have that in there for geeks, right? And that scene at the drive-thru is a scene when he's getting him set in the car and says, "You're going to drive straight to the picture of the Indians." That's a thing I always get emotional watching, because they're like, "Well, good luck to you," and this thing always sinks in when I'm watching it. Like, man, this is like, it's ending. This trilogy is ending. It's such a fun adventure. It's like, man, it's like the last adventure they're gonna have. I'm always like kind of sad when I'm watching that. But this is a great film. This is, some might even argue it's better than part one. because of the the ending is so great, and everything is satisfying in it at the very end, and it leaves absolutely no room for a part 4. So if this was made today, they would force a part 4 somehow, and I still think they're probably going to do some kind of weird reboot sometime, you know, with different actors and new storylines and whatever, but at some point, I think. But hopefully they won't get no one will get the rights to do that, because it's a great trilogy. So this is the DVD box set right here and then on the back you have the explains all the special features. This is why I got it really cheap at Goodwill one time. A great Goodwill find. It's got a lot of good interviews and like commentary and stuff like that if you are into that. All right, that's last night's feature presentation. Back to the Future Part 3, 1990. That's my review. Hope you watch it if you haven't already. And all right, time to gas up the DeLorean and head back to 1885 once again. Later, guys.